Racist white woman humiliates a black man on the plane, and then his true identity is revealed. On Christmas Eve, Flight 287 from New York to Los Angeles becomes more than just another journey. Through the swirling snow outside, Dr. Tom Johnson carries precious cargo, life-saving medicine for a dying child. But when Karen White, still grieving her husband's death in a medical mishap, becomes convinced that Tom poses a threat, the flight transforms into a crucible of prejudice, pain, and ultimately redemption. As tensions rise at 300, zero feet, hidden connections between passengers emerge, forcing them to confront their deepest fears and biases. In the darkness of winter, they'll discover that sometimes the greatest barriers aren't in the sky, but in the heart. Hey there! Taking a moment to watch this powerful story unfold? Drop a quick comment letting us know where you're watching from, and hit that like button. Your perspective makes our community richer. The bitter December wind howled across JFK International Airport, driving sheets of snow against the terminal windows. Inside Gate B-23, Flight 287 to Los Angeles was preparing for its final departure of Christmas Eve. The weather forecast warned of worsening conditions, and already dozens of flights had been canceled, leaving the terminal packed with stranded travelers, clutching gifts and wearing forced holiday smiles. Through the frosted windows, the Boeing 737 stood illuminated against the darkening sky, its wings collecting snow as ground crews scurried about in their neon yellow jackets. The gate agent's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing priority boarding for first-class passengers and those needing special assistance. The cabin of Flight 287 offered a stark contrast to the chaos outside, warm, orderly, and pristine. Christmas garlands hung delicately along the overhead bins, and soft holiday music played through the speakers. Flight attendants in crisp uniforms moved efficiently through the aisles, their professional demeanor masking any holiday fatigue. In first class, leather seats remained mostly empty, while coach filled quickly with passengers eager to reach loved ones before Christmas morning. The air was thick, with a mixture of holiday anticipation and travel anxiety, heightened by the weather's threatening turn. Overhead bins slammed shut with increasing frequency as more passengers filed in, some still brushing snow from their coats. Linda Matthews, the lead flight attendant with 15 years of experience, stood at the front of the cabin, greeting passengers with practiced warmth. Her keen eyes noticed everything: the businessman too busy with his phone to acknowledge her welcome, the elderly couple who might need extra attention during the flight, the mother traveling alone with 3 young children. But it was the growing tension between incoming passengers and the weather outside that concerned her most. Through the cabin windows, the snow intensified. The late afternoon darkness made the storm appear more menacing, and the airplane's exterior lights created halos in the swirling white. De-icing trucks were already positioning themselves around nearby aircraft, their orange warning lights pulsing through the gloom. Inside, the cabin's temperature struggled to overcome the cold air rushing in with each new passenger. The holiday spirit, present in small doses through decorations and music, seemed to be fighting a losing battle against mounting weather anxiety. Conversations among passengers focused on connecting flights, weather reports, and the possibility of delays. As the final boarding call echoed through the terminal, the remaining passengers hurried aboard, their faces showing relief at making the flight. Yet there was an undercurrent of tension. This wasn't just any flight on any evening. It was Christmas Eve, and for many aboard, reaching their destination meant more than just completing a journey. It meant keeping promises, maintaining traditions, and meant maintaining respect for family during the most important time of the year. Little did anyone know that this routine flight would become anything but ordinary, as the brewing storm outside would pale in comparison to the storm about to erupt within the cabin of Flight 287. Among the last passengers to board was Dr. Tom Johnson, a distinguished cardiac surgeon from Mount Sinai Hospital. At 45, his salt and pepper hair and quiet confidence spoke of experience, while his well-worn leather medical bag suggested a life dedicated to his profession. Despite his accomplished career, today he wasn't thinking about his many successful surgeries. His thoughts were with his adoptive father, Richard, lying in a Los Angeles hospital bed, time slipping away with each passing hour. Behind him, Karen White clutched her boarding pass with trembling hands. At 42, grief had aged her prematurely, etching lines around her once bright eyes. The gold wedding ring she still wore caught the cabin lights, a constant reminder of David, her late husband. A respected physician himself, David had died under another doctor's care, a loss that had transformed Karen's pain into deep-seated distrust, particularly toward medical professionals of color. Linda Matthews stood at the cabin entrance, her 38 years of life experience evident in the way she readily assessed each passenger. Her own son's struggles with racial prejudice at school had given her a unique sensitivity to discrimination, though her professional demeanor rarely betrayed these personal concerns. The wedding ring she'd stopped wearing 6 months ago left a pale mark on her finger, a reminder of her own incomplete healing. As Tom stored his medical bag carefully in the overhead compartment above his emergency exit row seat, Karen's eyes followed his every movement from her position several rows back. The medicine in Tom's bag wasn't just any prescription. It was the last hope for a dying child he'd never met, a specially imported treatment that couldn't wait until after the holidays. The cabin crew finished their preliminary checks as the last passengers settled in. Jim Torres, Linda's colleague of 5 years, noticed the way Karen watched Tom, recognition flickering in his eyes from years of witnessing similar scenarios. At 45, he'd seen how prejudice could poison the recycled air of an airplane cabin faster than any actual threat. Through the window, the snow continued its relentless descent, individual flakes catching the dim light of the winter evening. The holiday decorations seemed to mock the growing tension, tinsel garlands swaying gently with each movement through the cabin. Christmas carols played softly overhead, their cheerful melodies of stark contrast to the undercurrent of anxiety. None of these passengers knew how their lives were already entangled. They didn't know that the dying child awaiting Tom's medicine was Karen's daughter, Emma, or that Tom's adoptive father had been David White's mentor in medical school. They couldn't have guessed that Linda's son had once been saved by Dr. Johnson in an emergency surgery, or that the storm outside would be the least of their concerns during the next 6 hours. As the cabin door closed with a final thunk, these strangers found themselves sealed together in an aluminum tube, each carrying their own burdens, prejudices, and untold stories. The real turbulence wouldn't come from the weather, but from the collision of their lives at 350,000 feet. The first hour of the flight passed quietly as the plane climbed above the snowstorm. Tom Johnson reached into his medical bag, double-checking the temperature-controlled compartment containing the precious medicine. His movements, though careful and precise, caught Karen White's attention immediately. "Excuse me, Karen whispered, raising her hand as Linda passed. Her voice carried a tremor that wasn't entirely from anxiety. "That man near the emergency exit. He keeps checking his bag. Something doesn't seem right." Linda paused, maintaining her professional smile. "I understand your concern, ma'am, but Dr. Johnson is a registered passenger who—" "Doctor?" Karen interrupted, her voice sharp with disbelief. "Did he tell you that, and you just believed him?" Her fingers drummed nervously on the armrest, her wedding ring tapping against the plastic. Through the cabin's dim lighting, Karen watched as Tom carefully zipped his bag closed again. The methodical way he handled it, the frequent checks, in her mind, these weren't the actions of a doctor, but of someone with something to hide. The Christmas lights reflecting off the overhead bins cast strange shadows across his face, deepening her suspicions. "Has he been doing this since takeoff?" Karen continued, leaning closer to Linda. "Opening that bag, checking something inside, looking around to see if anyone's watching. In this day and age, can we really afford to be naive?" Linda felt the weight of the situation settling in his stomach. She'd seen this scenario unfold before. Prejudice masked as concern, fear disguised as vigilance. "Ma'am, I assure you all passengers and their belongings have been thoroughly screened." "But have they really?" Karen's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby passengers. "My husband was a doctor, a real doctor, and he never acted like that with his medical bag. Never." The mention of her husband made Karen's voice crack slightly, a glimpse of raw pain beneath her suspicion. Linda noticed how she twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit that spoke of deeper wounds. Tom, seemingly oblivious to the scrutiny, pulled out his phone to check the time. The gesture, innocent as it was, made Karen stiffen in her seat. She grabbed Linda's wrist, her fingers trembling. "There. You see, he's probably signaling someone." Linda gently removed Karen's hand, keeping her voice low and calm. "Ma'am, using phones in airplane mode is perfectly acceptable." "You're not listening," Karen hissed, frustration coloring her words. "None of you are listening, just like nobody listened when I tried to tell them about the doctor who killed my husband." The last words hung in the air, heavy with accusation and unresolved grief. Several passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others pretended not to hear. Through it all, Tom continued his periodic checks of the medical bag, each movement unwittingly adding fuel to Karen's growing paranoia. The tension in the cabin began to rise like the plane itself, climbing steadily toward an inevitable confrontation. As the plane cruised through the dark winter sky, Karen's growing agitation began to spread like a contagion through the cabin. She started reaching out to other passengers, her voice a urgent whisper. "Look at him," she murmured to the elderly man beside her. "Oh, the way he keeps touching that bag. Don't you think it's strange?" The man shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. From his seat, Tom felt the weight of scrutiny bearing down on him. The cabin's holiday decorations now seemed to mock the growing tension, tinsel garlands catching light like silent witnesses. He checked his watch again. 4 more hours until landing. The medicine needed regular temperature monitoring, but each time he reached for his bag, he could feel more eyes turning his way. Linda watched the situation deteriorating from her position near the galley. She'd already briefed Jim and the other flight attendants, warning them to stay alert. The Christmas carols playing softly through the speakers couldn't mask the whispers spreading through the cabin. "I saw on the news," Karen was saying to a young mother across the aisle, her voice trembling with conviction, "about people who smuggle things on medical flights. They think nobody will question a doctor's bag." The mother pulled her child closer, uncertainty clouding her face. Tom opened his bag once more, checking the medicine's temperature display. The movement caught Karen's eye, and she stood abruptly, her voice rising above the engine noise. "There, he's doing it again. Why isn't anyone doing anything?" "Why, nobody is doing it." Linda moved quickly to Karen's side, speaking in low, measured tones. "Ma'am, please return to your seat." "No," Karen's voice cracked with emotion. "My husband trusted doctors, too. He trusted them right up until—" She stopped, choking back tears. The cabin had gone silent, except for the hum of engines and the incongruously cheerful holiday music. Tom closed his bag slowly, deliberately. He could feel the tension radiating through the cabin. Could see the way parents held their children closer, how businessmen cast furtive glances his way. The holiday lights, reflected in the windows, cast dancing shadows that seemed to heighten the sense of unease. "I demand to see what's in that bag," Karen announced, her voice carrying through the hushed cabin. "We have a right to know what he's hiding." Linda positioned herself between Karen and Tom's row. "Ma'am, we cannot and will not search a passenger's private medical equipment." "Private medical equipment?" Karen laughed bitterly. "Is that what we're calling it? My husband was a surgeon for 20 years. I know what a real medical bag looks like." The words hung in the air like frost, and in that moment Tom realized this was more than just casual prejudice. There was something deeper here, a wound that hadn't healed. Through the window beside him, the winter night pressed close, stars hidden behind clouds, as the first real confrontation of the evening began to unfold at 3, 5, 0, 0. If this story moves you, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us share more powerful narratives that challenge perspectives and touch hearts. Together, we can make a difference. The confrontation erupted with the force of the winter storm they'd left behind. Karen pushed past Linda, her grief-fueled determination carrying her down the aisle toward Tom's seat. The Christmas lights cast strange shadows across her face, highlighting the tears threatening to spill. "Open it," she demanded, pointing at Tom's medical bag. Her voice trembled, but carried the weight of accumulated pain. "If you're really a doctor, prove it. Show us all what you're so carefully guarding." Tom remained seated, his hands folded calmly in his lap. The cabin had gone completely silent except for the drone of engines and the now jarring sound of Silent Night playing overhead. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I understand you're upset, but—" "Don't patronize me," Karen's voice cracked. "My husband was Dr. David White, chief of surgery at Boston Memorial. He trusted another doctor like you, and now he's dead." "Oh." The revelation sent whispers rippling through the cabin. Linda stepped forward, her professional demeanor masking her own internal struggle. "Mrs. White, please." "No." Karen's hand shot out, grabbing for the medical bag. "We have a right to know. All of us." Tom moved quickly, but calmly, securing the bag before she could reach it. "This bag contains temperature-sensitive medication that cannot be compromised." His voice remained steady, though his eyes betrayed a deeper understanding of her pain. Temperature sensitive? Karen laughed bitterly. Is that what they're calling it now? David was temperature sensitive too, when they left him waiting for 3 hours while his so-called colleague finished his golf game. The personal tragedy behind her accusations hung heavy in the air. Other passengers shifted uncomfortably, torn between sympathy for her obvious pain and discomfort at her behavior. Mrs. White. Tom spoke her name with unexpected gentleness. I didn't know your husband, but as a doctor... You're not a doctor! Karen's voice rose hysterically. Show us your credentials. Show us what's really in that bag. Linda exchanged glances with Jim, who had positioned himself nearby. They'd dealt with difficult passengers before, but this was different. The raw emotion in Karen's voice, the way she kept touching her wedding ring, the painful personal history bleeding into the present, this was a powder keg waiting to explode. Through the windows, the winter night pressed close, stars hidden behind clouds. The holiday decorations seemed to mock the tension, tinsel catching light like tears. Tom looked at his watch again. 3 hours and 45 minutes until landing. The medicine needed checking again soon, but each movement toward his bag now risked escalating the situation. My husband trusted people like you, Karen continued, her voice dropping to a painful whisper. He believed in giving everyone a chance. And look where that got him. She turned to the other passengers, seeking allies. Are we all just going to sit here and pretend this is normal? Tom's hands remained steady on the medical bag, but his mind raced. He could show her his credentials, reveal the medicine's purpose, but that would compromise the privacy of his patient. Yet as he watched Karen's mounting distress, he recognized something beyond prejudice in her eyes, a deep, unhealed wound that no medical license could address. The tension in the cabin had reached a breaking point. Holiday music continued to play overhead, a surreal soundtrack to the drama unfolding in the narrow aisle. And then, as O Holy Night began its gentle chorus, Karen made a decisive move toward the bag that would change everything. In the split second before Karen's hands reached the bag, Tom made a decision. With practiced calm, he stood, his tall frame filling the narrow aisle. Mrs. White, he said, reaching into his pocket, before you do something we'll both regret, look at this. He pulled out a worn photograph, its edges softened by years of handling. In it, a younger version of himself stood beside an older white man in a doctor's coat. They were both smiling, the older man's hand proudly resting on Tom's shoulder. This was taken the day I graduated medical school, Tom explained softly. The man beside me is Dr. Richard Johnson, my adoptive father. He's dying in Los Angeles right now, and I'm missing his last hours to transport this medicine. The cabin fell silent. Even the Christmas music seemed to fade into the background. Karen's hands trembled as she stared at the photograph, her eyes widening with recognition. Richard Johnson? Her voice cracked. From Boston Memorial? Tom nodded slowly. He was chief of cardiology there for 20 years. Karen's legs gave way, and Linda quickly helped her into a nearby empty seat. He was David's mentor, she whispered, tears finally spilling over. He spoke at our wedding. The revelation rippled through the cabin like a shockwave. Tom knelt beside Karen's seat, his voice gentle but firm. Mrs. White, I'm carrying experimental cardiac medicine for a young patient who's running out of time. Every minute counts, which is why I keep checking the temperature. I'm not a threat. I'm just trying to save a life just like your husband did every day. Karen's hands covered her face, years of pain and prejudice cracking like ice in spring. David always said Richard had a son who became a doctor, but I never... She couldn't finish the sentence. Linda stood nearby, witnessing the transformation with tears in her own eyes. The other passengers watched in stunned silence as the confrontation dissolved into something entirely different. Tom reached into his bag, carefully removing a medical ID badge. Your husband was right about giving people chances, Mrs. White. Dr. Richard Johnson gave me mine when he found me in foster care. He taught me that healing isn't just about medicine. It's about seeing the person behind the pain. Karen stared at the badge, then back at the photograph. The Christmas lights reflected off her tears, creating prisms of color. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "After David died, I couldn't." "I understand loss, Mrs. White," Tom said quietly. "And I understand why you're afraid. But right now, there's a child in Los Angeles who needs this medicine, just like there were patients who needed your husband's skill and compassion." The tension in the cabin had transformed into something else, a shared witness to human vulnerability and connection. The holiday decorations no longer seemed to mock, but to embrace the moment, their soft glow illuminating faces moved by the unfolding scene. But as Karen wiped her tears, as other passengers began to relax, as Linda smiled in relief, none of them knew that this was only the beginning. The real test of their humanity, the true measure of their capacity for forgiveness and understanding, was still to come. Through the airplane windows, the winter night continued its silent watch, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal the deepest truth of all. As the plane continued its journey westward, Tom settled back into his seat, but the atmosphere in the cabin had fundamentally changed. With Karen's permission, he began sharing the story that connected them all. "Dr. Richard Johnson," Tom began, his voice carrying quietly through the hushed cabin, "found me at St. Mary's Orphanage when I was 12. I had a heart condition that nobody wanted to deal with. Too expensive, too risky for a foster child." The Christmas lights cast a gentle glow as he continued, "I was reading a medical textbook when he first saw me. Most kids had comics or toys. I had stolen textbooks from the local library because I wanted to understand what was wrong with my heart." Karen listened intently, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, wedding ring catching the light. Other passengers leaned in, forgotten holiday anxieties replaced by absorption in the unfolding story. "Richard didn't just fix my heart," Tom continued, touching his chest unconsciously. "He showed me what it meant to be a doctor. But more importantly, he showed me what it meant to be a father." His voice caught slightly. He and his wife Sarah couldn't have children of their own. They adopted me, despite everyone saying it would damage their social standing. Linda, standing nearby, thought of her own son and his struggles. She watched as Tom pulled out another photograph, this one showing a teenage version of himself in a hospital bed, Richard Johnson sleeping in a chair beside him. "My first surgery was complicated," Tom explained. "Richard stayed with me for 3 days straight. That's when I knew I wanted to be just like him." He paused, looking at Karen. "Your husband David was one of the residents on my case." Karen's sharp intake of breath was audible. "David never told me." "Probably didn't connect the skinny kid with the heart condition to the doctor I became," Tom smiled sadly. "But he was there for all 3 of my surgeries. He and Richard taught me that medicine isn't about protocols and procedures. It's about seeing the person behind the illness. The story of Tom's rise through medical school unfolded like a Christmas tale of redemption. Working nights to pay for extra classes, studying under Richard's guidance, facing discrimination and doubt at every turn. But there was pain woven through the triumph. My birth mother, Tom's voice grew quieter, died because the hospital wouldn't treat her immediately. They made assumptions about her ability to pay, about her character, based on how she looked. By the time they realized she was having a heart attack, it was too late. The cabin was absolutely silent now, even the children sensing the gravity of the moment. Through the windows, the winter night seemed to press closer, as if listening. That's why I became a cardiac surgeon, Tom continued. And that's why I understand your fear, Mrs. White. Loss changes us. It makes us see danger everywhere. But it can also make us stronger, make us better healers. He reached into his bag again, this time pulling out a warm leather notebook. This was Richard's journal from his residency. He documented every case, every lesson, every mistake. David's name appears in here dozens of times. They worked together for years, saving lives, pushing each other to be better doctors. Karen's hands trembled as she touched the journal. David used to talk about his mentor for hours, she whispered. He said everything he knew about compassion in medicine he learned from Richard Johnson. Tom nodded, his eyes growing distant. Richard called me last week. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He's been fighting it quietly for months. Didn't want to distract me from my work. Classic Richard, always putting others first. The revelation hung in the air like frost. Every passenger felt the weight of time slipping away, of last chances and missed goodbyes. Through the airplane windows, the stars had emerged from behind the clouds, their cold light a reminder of distance and longing. It's in Cedar Sinai, Tom's voice was barely audible. The doctors say he has hours, maybe minutes. I should be there, but he gestured to his medical bag. This medicine can't wait. It's for a special case, a child who's running out of options. The irony of his sacrifice wasn't lost on anyone. Missing his adoptive father's final moments to save another life, just as Richard had taught him. The Christmas decorations in the cabin seemed to glow more softly now, as if in reverence to the unfolding story of love, loss, and duty. But what none of them knew, what even Tom couldn't have guessed, was that the true connection between them was still waiting to be revealed. As the plane continued its journey through the winter night, carrying its cargo of interconnected lives and untold stories, fate was preparing its final heart-wrenching twist. As Tom's story settled over the cabin like fresh snow, Karen began to share her own tale, each word heavy with grief and regret. David was working late that night, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Just another Tuesday evening at the hospital. He always worked late on Tuesdays because that's when the most challenging cases came in. Her fingers traced the outline of her wedding ring. Our daughter, Emma, had a dance recital. He promised he'd make the next one. The holiday lights cast gentle shadows across her face as she continued. The irony is, he wasn't even the patient that night. He was checking on his post-op cases when he felt the first chest pain. A doctor having a heart attack in his own hospital. It should have been the best possible scenario. Tom leaned forward slightly, professional interest mixing with genuine concern. Linda stood nearby, all pretense of routine flight service forgotten. The doctor on call," Karen's voice hardened, "was busy with another patient. They said it wasn't deliberate negligence, just unfortunate timing. But David waited 3 hours for treatment. 3 hours while a doctor he'd never met decided his case wasn't urgent enough." She pulled out her phone, showing a photo of a smiling man with kind eyes standing next to a young girl in a ballet costume. This was taken the weekend before. Emma was so proud of her pirouette. David promised to help her practice for the winter showcase. The cabin seemed to hold its collective breath as Karen continued. Emma started having heart problems shortly after. The doctors said it wasn't related to the stress of losing her father, but I saw how it changed her. She stopped dancing, stopped smiling, started having episodes that scared me to death. Tom's hand tightened imperceptibly on his medical bag as Karen described her daughter's symptoms. His professional training made him recognize the pattern, but he remained silent, letting her story unfold. "The last specialist we saw," Karen's voice cracked, "said there's an experimental treatment available, something about targeted therapy for pediatric cardiac conditions. But the waiting list," she shook her head, tears falling freely now, "they said she might not have that much time." The Christmas carols playing softly overhead seemed to fade into the background as Karen revealed her deepest fear. "I'm not even going home for Christmas. Emma's in Cedars-Sinai for tests. They said there might be a new medicine coming, something that could help. But every day she gets weaker, and I keep seeing David in her eyes, and She couldn't continue. The cabin was absolutely silent except for the hum of engines and Karen's muffled sobs. Parents held their children closer, thinking of their own blessings, their own fears. Linda offered Karen a tissue, her own eyes glistening. Through the windows, the winter night stretched endlessly, stars cold and distant, as if witnessing this confession of grief and hope. "After David died," Karen finally continued, "I couldn't trust doctors anymore, especially," she glanced at Tom apologetically, "especially those who reminded me of the one who let him wait. I know it's wrong. I know David would be ashamed of me. He believed in giving everyone a chance." Tom sat very still, his mind racing. The temperature-sensitive medicine in his bag seemed to grow heavier with each word Karen spoke. But he wasn't ready for the final piece of the puzzle, the revelation that would change everything. Karen pulled out one last photo, a recent one of Emma in a hospital bed, pale but smiling bravely. "This was taken yesterday. The doctors say if the new treatment doesn't arrive soon..." She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. The photo had already done its work. Tom stared at it, his face draining of color as recognition dawned. The same brave smile he'd seen in the patient files, the same determined eyes. But before he could speak, before he could reveal the devastating connection between his mission and Karen's grief, a new crisis demanded their attention. The plane hit unexpected turbulence, shaking violently, and Karen, who had been standing, stumbled. As she fell, her hand caught Tom's medical bag, sending it tumbling. The precious medicine inside, meant for a dying child at Cedars-Sinai, meant for Emma, was now in danger. And in that split second, as both Tom and Karen reached for the fallen bag, their interconnected destinies were about to collide in a way that would test not just their prejudices, but their very humanity. The winter night pressed against the windows, witness to the unfolding drama, as the true meaning of Christmas, sacrifice, forgiveness, and redemption, was about to be tested at the 3, 5, 0, 0, 0 feet through. The medical bag hit the floor with a sickening thud, sliding across the aisle as the plane shuddered through another patch of turbulence. The fasten seatbelt sign chimed urgently overhead, its warning nearly drowned out by gasps from startled passengers. Tom lunged for the bag, his movements precise despite the plane's violent rocking. But as he reached it, Karen's earlier words about Emma echoed in his mind. The realization of who his patient was, the crushing weight of the connection, made his hands tremble for the first time that night. No, no, he muttered, quickly unzipping the bag to check the medicine's protective case. The cabin lights flickered, casting strange shadows as he examined the temperature display. His face told the story before his words could. "The cooling unit's damaged," he announced quietly, professional calm, masking devastating implications. "The medicine? It's compromised." Karen, still regaining her balance with Linda's help, didn't immediately grasp the significance, but Tom knew this was the only dose available, rushed from Switzerland for one specific patient. For Emma, her last hope. Then, as if the universe hadn't tested them enough, Karen suddenly clutched her chest, her face contorting in pain. I can't breathe," she gasped, collapsing into a nearby seat. The irony was cruel. A heart attack, just like her husband, just like the tragedy that had started it all. "Is there a doctor on board?" Linda's voice carried through the cabin before she caught herself, turning to Tom with desperate eyes. Tom looked down at the compromised medicine in his hands, the treatment that might have saved Emma, then at Karen, whose symptoms were rapidly worsening. The same choice that had killed his birth mother, that had killed David White, now lay before him, who to save. "I need my bag," he said firmly, his decision made, "and space to work." The other passengers quickly cleared the area as Tom knelt beside Karen. Her eyes were wide with fear and recognition. She knew what was happening to her, knew she was experiencing David's final moments. "The medicine," she gasped, having finally understood its purpose. Emma needs her mother," Tom cut her off, his voice gentle but firm as he pulled emergency cardiac medications from his bag. "I didn't get to save my mother. I didn't get to save your husband. But I'm here now, and I'm not losing another parent to a heart attack at Christmas." The plane continued to shake as Tom worked, the winter storm outside matching the turbulence of emotions within. Christmas lights swayed overhead, casting moving shadows across their faces as he administered the emergency medicine. Linda assisted silently, her professional calm enhanced by personal investment. Other passengers watched in tense silence, the holiday music still playing softly, seeming surreal against the drama unfolding before them. "Stay with me, Mrs. White," Tom urged, his hands steady as he monitored her vital signs. "Emma's going to dance again. She's going to smile again. But she needs you for that." Karen's eyes filled with tears, whether from pain or emotion wasn't clear. "I'm sorry," she whispered. All those things I said? The way I treated you?" "Save your strength," Tom replied, checking her pulse. "We have more important things to focus on right now." But his voice carried no bitterness, only professional focus, mixed with deep compassion. Through the windows, The winter night seemed to press closer, as if holding its breath. The compromised medicine sat forgotten in its case, its temperature rising degree by degree, hope fading with each passing minute. "I was so wrong," Karen managed between labored breaths. "David would have been so ashamed of me." "No," Tom said firmly, preparing another injection. "David would be proud that you fought so hard for Emma. Now fight for yourself. Fight to see her dance again." The turbulence began to ease, but the tension in the cabin remained high. Every passenger had become invested in this drama of redemption and sacrifice. Parents held their children closer. Couples gripped hands tighter. Strangers exchanged glances of shared concern. As Tom worked to stabilize Karen, the full weight of his choice hung in the air. The medicine that might have saved Emma was ruined. His chance to say goodbye to his dying adoptive father was slipping away. But here, in this moment, he was doing what both Richard and David would have wanted, putting a patient's immediate need above all else. But what no one yet knew, what fate had kept hidden until this precise moment, was that this crisis would lead to an even more impossible choice. As Karen's condition stabilized and Tom finally sat back exhausted, Linda approached with news from the cockpit that would change everything once again. The winter storm wasn't just following them. It was about to trap them all in a decision that would test the very limits of forgiveness, sacrifice, and hope. "Dr. Johnson." Linda's voice was tense. "The storm's forced Los Angeles to close all runways. They're diverting us to Phoenix." She paused, letting the implications sink in. "We'll be 3 hours late." The news hit Tom like a physical blow. 3 more hours meant Richard would certainly be gone before he arrived. But worse, it meant even if they could get replacement medicine for Emma, it would be too late. Karen, now stabilized but weak, reached for Tom's hand. "Tell me," she whispered, "the medicine in your bag, it was for Emma, wasn't it?" The cabin fell silent. Even the Christmas music seemed to pause, as Tom nodded slowly. "A new treatment from Switzerland. The only dose available in time." His voice cracked slightly. "I didn't know she was your daughter until I saw her photo." Karen's eyes filled with fresh tears. "And now it's ruined because of me." The weight of responsibility crushed her voice to a whisper. "I've killed my own daughter." "Now," Tom said firmly, still holding her hand. "This isn't over. Not yet." He turned to Linda. "I need to make a call from the cockpit. Now." As Linda led him forward, the other passengers watched in respectful silence. The Christmas lights reflected off the winter darkness outside, creating halos in the storm. In the cockpit, Tom made 3 rapid calls, the first to his colleague in Phoenix, arranging for emergency transport, the second to the Swiss laboratory about replacement medicine, the third to Cedar's Senate. When he returned to the cabin, his face was set with determination. "Mrs. White, there's a possibility, a small one, but we need to make some difficult decisions." He knelt beside her seat, speaking quietly but loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "The lab can have another dose ready in 4 hours, but Emma's latest test shows she may not have that long." He paused, gathering strength. Unless what?" Karen's voice trembled. "Unless I try something experimental. Something Richard developed but never published." Tom's eyes grew distant. He called it the Johnson Protocol. "It's risky, but it might buy Emma enough time." "But you'd need to be there," Karen realized. "In Phoenix." Tom nodded. which means I definitely won't make it to Richard in time. The choice hung in the air like frost: save his father's legacy through Emma, or say goodbye to the man who had saved him. Karen struggled to sit up straighter. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do this for us?" "After how I treated you?" Tom's answer was interrupted by an elderly passenger who stood up slowly. "Because that's what Christmas is about," the man said, his voice carrying wisdom and warmth. "It's about forgiveness, about sacrifice." Other passengers began to nod, some wiping tears. The holiday decorations no longer seemed artificial or out of place. They highlighted the profound truth unfolding before them. "My father," Tom said quietly, "taught me that being a doctor isn't about who deserves care. It's about who needs it." He squeezed Karen's hand. "Emma needs it. And Richard would understand." The plane descended through the storm toward Phoenix, carrying its cargo of interconnected lives and impossible choices. The Christmas lights swayed gently, casting alternating light and shadow across faces united in witness to this modern miracle of forgiveness. "I'll never be able to make this right," Karen whispered, looking at Tom with new eyes. "What I said, how I acted." "You already have," Tom replied, checking her vital signs again. "You've shown me that change is possible, that healing isn't just about medicine." But as the plane began its final approach to Phoenix, none of them could have predicted the final twist fate had in store. Because waiting at the terminal was news that would transform their understanding of sacrifice, redemption, and the true meaning of family. Through the snow-streaked windows, the lights of Phoenix appeared like stars fallen to earth, the same stars that had witnessed Richard Johnson save a young boy's life decades ago, that had watched David White mentor countless young doctors, that now illuminated this night of impossible choices and unexpected grace. As the landing gear deployed with a mechanical whine, Tom looked at his watch one last time. In Los Angeles, Richard's monitors were beeping steadily, and in the pediatric ICU, Emma's brave smile was fading. And here at 35000 feet, a doctor who had learned about healing from both medicine and prejudice, prepared to honor his father's legacy in the most fitting way possible, by saving the daughter of the woman who had feared him. The winter night pressed close against the windows, no longer threatening, but witnessing, as the true miracle of Christmas prepared to unfold at ground level. Dear viewers, if this story of redemption and human connection has touched your heart, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support enables us to continue sharing powerful narratives that challenge perspectives and bring light to difficult conversations. Together, we can create understanding through storytelling. Every subscription makes a difference. The Phoenix Airport Terminal was eerily quiet at midnight on Christmas Eve, the usual bustle replaced by the soft glow of holiday decorations and the gentle falling of snow visible through the large windows. Tom and Karen were immediately whisked away by waiting medical staff, their footsteps echoing through the nearly empty corridors. Tom's phone buzzed, a message from Cedars-Sinai. His hands trembled as he read it. "Richard's gown," he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the hum of fluorescent lights. He held on as long as he could. Karen, being wheeled alongside him, reached out to touch his arm. The same hands that had earlier threatened and accused now offered comfort. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. But there was no time to grieve. The emergency team was already briefing them on Emma's deteriorating condition. Her heart was failing faster than expected, the monitors showing an increasingly unstable rhythm. As they rushed toward the waiting medical transport, Tom's colleague, Dr. Sarah Chen, approached with devastating news. "The replacement medicine from Switzerland," she said, her face grave. "The storms grounded all flights. There's no way to get it here in time." The tragedy of the situation hit them all at once. Richard was gone, the original medicine was ruined, the replacement was unreachable, and Emma's time was running out. In the harsh hospital lighting, Tom looked suddenly older, the weight of multiple losses etching deep lines around his eyes. He pulled out Richard's worn journal, its pages containing the experimental protocol that might be Emma's last hope. "Never publish this," Tom explained to Dr. Chen, his voice thick with emotion. "Said it needed more testing, but it's all we have left." Karen watched from her wheelchair, her own heart aching, not just from her recent attack, but from the crushing realization that her prejudice had contributed to this cascade of tragedy. The Christmas decorations in the hospital corridor seemed to mock their pain, their cheerful colors at odds with the gravity of the moment. "The last thing Richard said to me," Tom continued, flipping through the journal's pages with trembling fingers, "was that sometimes the greatest medical breakthroughs come from our darkest moments." He looked up at Dr. Chen. "He was working on this protocol when he found me at the orphanage. Said watching me heal inspired him to think differently about cardiac care." Through the windows the snow continued to fall, each flake carrying the weight of what had been lost. A father's final goodbye, a daughter's fading chance, a widow's faith in humanity. The night that had started with fear and accusation had transformed into something far more profound and painful. But what none of them knew yet was that Richard Johnson had left one final gift, a message that would arrive at exactly the right moment, proving that even in death, his wisdom would continue to save lives. As they prepared for what might be their last chance to save Emma, the hospital's Christmas tree lights flickered softly, casting alternating shadows and light across faces marked by loss, regret, and desperate hope. The real tragedy wasn't just in what had been lost, but in how much time had been wasted on fear and prejudice instead of understanding and connection. In Cedars-Sinai's pediatric ICU, Emma White lay pale against white sheets, her brave smile now replaced by the mechanical rhythm of breathing apparatus. The Christmas tree in the corner of her room, decorated by caring nurses, cast colored shadows that danced across medical monitors displaying increasingly concerning numbers. Tom's phone rang again, this time with a voice message from Richard, recorded just hours before his passing. The entire medical team paused as he put it on speaker, Richard's weak but determined voice filling the quiet room. "Tom, son, if you're hearing this, I'm already gone. But there's something you need to know about the Johnson protocol. The missing piece." A painful cough interrupted his words. "It's in Emma White's case file. I was consulting before I got too sick. She's David's daughter, Tom. The protocol, it was always meant for her." Karen collapsed into her wheelchair, overcome by the revelation. The protocol hadn't been just a theoretical treatment. Richard had been developing it specifically for Emma, working until his final days to save his old friend's granddaughter. "David and I started this research decades ago," Richard's voice continued. "We knew the risks, the potential. But we ran out of time. Now it's up to you, son. You have to finish what we started." The message ended, leaving behind a silence heavier than the snow falling outside. Tom stood frozen, Richard's journal in one hand, his phone in the other, the weight of 3 generations of medical legacy pressing down on him. Through the ICU window, they could see Emma's chest rising and falling with each assisted breath. The Christmas lights reflected off the medical equipment, creating a surreal tableau of holiday cheer and medical crisis. "Knew," Tom whispered, realization dawning. "Richard knew about Emma all along. He was trying to tell me. That's why he insisted I take this flight, carry the medicine myself." Dr. Chen reviewed the protocol notes quickly. The original medicine was just part of the treatment, she confirmed. The full protocol requires real-time adjustments based on patient response. That's why it needed someone who understood both the science and the human element. Karen looked up at Tom, tears streaming down her face. "All this time, while I was accusing you, doubting you, Richard was working to save my daughter, and now—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. The monitors told the story. Emma's condition was deteriorating rapidly. The precious hours lost to prejudice and misunderstanding couldn't be reclaimed. Outside, the winter storm intensified, as if nature itself was reflecting the gravity of their loss. The hospital Christmas tree lights began to flicker, each flash illuminating faces marked by grief, regret, and the crushing weight of missed opportunities. But in this darkest moment, as all hope seemed lost, fate had one final card to play. Because sometimes, as Richard Johnson had taught both in life and death, the greatest miracles come not from medicine alone, but from the human heart's capacity for forgiveness, sacrifice, and love. As the clock struck midnight, marking the official start of Christmas Day, Tom opened Richard's journal one last time, finding a handwritten note that would change everything. A note that proved some gifts are worth more than time itself. The note fell from Richard's journal like a snowflake, drifting to the hospital floor in the glow of Christmas lights. Tom's hands shook as he picked it up, recognizing his adoptive father's careful handwriting. "Dear Tom, if you're reading this, then both David's prophecy and my fears have come true. Emma's condition mirrors yours from 25 years ago, the same genetic marker, the same stubborn determination to survive. You were my miracle then. Now she needs to be yours. The medicine from Switzerland was never the full solution. It was a catalyst, designed to work with something far more precious, your blood. You carry the antibodies we synthesized during your treatment. Your survival wasn't just luck, it was the blueprint for Emma's salvation. David and I spent years studying your case, preparing for the day another child might need the same miracle. Emma is that child. Your blood, combined with the Johnson protocol, is her only hope. Sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in our deepest fears." Dad, the revelation hit the room like a thunderclap. Dr. Chen immediately began reviewing Tom's old medical records, her eyes widening with understanding. "He's right," she breathed. "The genetic markers, the resistance patterns, they're identical." Karen, still weak from her own cardiac event, gripped the arms of her wheelchair. "You mean, all this time—" "I was never just the carrier of Emma's medicine," Tom said softly. "I am the medicine." The Christmas tree lights seemed to pulse brighter, as if acknowledging the divine irony of the situation. The man Karen had feared and distrusted was literally carrying her daughter's salvation in his veins. Richard knew, Tom continued, his voice thick with emotion. He knew Emma would need more than just the Swiss treatment. That's why he insisted I make this flight myself, his voice broke, why he held on so long, waiting to make sure I understood. Dr. Chin was already mobilizing her team. We'll need to start immediately. The antibodies in your blood, combined with what's left of the original medicine and the Johnson protocol, it's complex, but it might work. Through the ICU window, Emma's monitors continued their ominous rhythm. The snow fell harder outside, each flake carrying the weight of destiny. The same storm that had grounded flights, ruined the original medicine, and forced their diversion to Phoenix had also brought them exactly where they needed to be. All those years ago, Tom said, looking at Karen, when I was dying in that orphanage, Richard and David didn't see color or status. They saw a child who needed help. They turned my survival into a gift that could keep giving. He rolled up his sleeve. Now it's my turn. Karen reached for his hand, her earlier prejudice transformed into profound gratitude. I don't deserve this. After how I treated you. This isn't about deserving, Tom replied, echoing Richard's words from long ago. It's about healing. All of us. The hospital corridor buzzed with renewed activity as the medical team prepared for the procedure. But what none of them realized yet was that this revelation was only the first part of a greater truth. Because, while Tom's blood might save Emma's life, the real miracle of Christmas Eve was still unfolding, a miracle of human connection that would transform not just one child's heart, but the hearts of everyone involved. The winter night pressed against the hospital windows, no longer threatening, but witnessing as science and spirit prepared to dance one final time. As the medical team prepared for the procedure, a nurse rushed in with another discovery, a second letter, this one sealed in a worn envelope, addressed to Karen in David's handwriting. It had been stored with Emma's medical files, waiting for this exact moment. With trembling fingers, Karen opened it, her late husband's words bridging the years. My dearest Karen, if you're reading this, then Richard's prediction was right. Our Emma has inherited the same condition that nearly took Tom Johnson's life years ago. I'd never told you about him, the young boy whose survival taught us so much about healing, both bodies and souls. The night I died, I was reviewing Tom's case files, searching for answers for Emma. I knew her symptoms were starting, though I couldn't bring myself to tell you. I was supposed to meet with Richard that night to discuss a revolutionary treatment protocol they were developing. The doctor you blamed for my death wasn't negligent. He was Tom Johnson, working a double shift trying to save multiple critical patients. He didn't know who I was when I was brought in. By the time he realized, it was too late. I've watched him carry that guilt, channeling it into becoming one of the finest cardiac surgeons in the country. If fate has brought him into your life, trust him. He carries not just the cure for Emma's heart in his blood, but the cure for hatred in his spirit. Love always. David? The revelation stunned the room into silence. Tom stood frozen, the memory of that tragic night floating back, the overwhelming ER, the critical patients, the man he couldn't save. He'd never known it was David White. You tried to save him, Karen whispered, years of misdirected anger crumbling. All this time, I've been blaming you. And you were there, trying to save him. "I've carried that night with me every day," Tom admitted, his voice raw. "It drove me to work harder, to be better. I never knew he was Richard's friend, Emma's father." The Christmas lights caught the tears streaming down both their faces, creating prisms of understanding and forgiveness. Outside, the storm began to ease, as if nature itself acknowledged this moment of healing. Dr. Chin, wiping her own eyes, checked the final preparations. "We're ready," she announced softly. Before Tom followed her, he turned to Karen. Your husband's letter. He knew this might happen. He and Richard, they were preparing for this moment even then. They understood something we're just learning, that healing comes in many forms." Karen reached for his hand again, but this time with a different touch. Not the desperate grip of a worried mother, but the gently squeeze of newfound family. "Save our daughter," she said simply. As Tom was led away to begin the procedure, the weight of multiple legacies rested on his shoulders. Richard's medical brilliance, David's forgiveness, and his own journey from abandoned child to healer. The very prejudice that had nearly prevented him from reaching Emma had been part of a greater plan, bringing him exactly where he needed to be. But the night's final revelation was still to come. Because in the quiet hours that followed, as Tom's blood flowed into Emma's veins, carrying with it not just antibodies, but 3 generations of medical wisdom and human compassion, a Christmas miracle would unfold that would reshape their understanding of family, forgiveness, and the true nature of healing. The winter dawn approached, promising not just a new day, but a new chapter in all their lives. Dawn broke over Phoenix on Christmas morning, painting the snow-covered city in gentle hues of pink and gold. In Emma's ICU room, the Christmas tree lights had been dimmed, but a different kind of light was beginning to shine, the light of hope in the steady beat of strengthening vital signs. Tom sat beside Emma's bed, exhausted from the procedure, but unwilling to leave. Karen dozed in her wheelchair nearby, her hand resting protectively on her daughter's arm. The morning sun cast long shadows through the window, mixing with the fading glow of holiday decorations. Emma's eyes flooded open slowly, focusing first on her mother, then on Tom. Her voice was weak, but clear. Are you the angel Mom's been talking about?" Tom smiled gently, sharing a glance with Karen. "No, Emma. I'm just a doctor who knew your dad and grandfather." "But you gave me your blood," Emma said softly. "The nurses said it was magic blood, like in the Christmas stories." Karen wheeled closer, taking her daughter's hand. "It was more than magic, sweetheart. It was a gift from many people who loved you, some of whom we never knew we had." Through the window, they could see fresh snow beginning to fall, each flake catching the morning light like tiny stars. The hospital was quiet, wrapped in the peace of Christmas morning, as if the entire world was holding its breath to witness this moment of healing. Dr. Chen entered with the latest test results, her face bright with joy. "The protocol is working better than we could have hoped," she announced. "Emma's heart is responding beautifully to the treatment. She has already received 2 ketogenic sodas and is feeling high." But the real miracle wasn't just in the medical charts. It was in the way Emma's eyes lit up when Tom showed her the old photograph of himself with Richard and David. 3 generations of healers connected by more than medicine. It was in the tears that fell freely as Karen listened to Emma ask Tom questions about her father, learning new stories about the man she'd lost too soon. "Dad used to say that doctors were like Christmas elves," Emma remembered, her color improving with each hour. "Working magic when everyone else was sleeping." Tom nodded, thinking of Richard and David, their legacy living on in this moment. Your dad was right, but the real magic isn't in the medicine. It's in the way people can change, heal, and forgive. As morning light filled the room, a nurse brought in a small Christmas tree for Emma's bedside. Karen began decorating it with paper chains the staff had made, while Tom hung his stethoscope on one branch, making Emma giggle. But this peaceful scene was about to be transformed by one final surprise, a Christmas gift that would prove that some miracles are too perfect to be coincidental, and some families are formed not by blood, but by the choices we make in our darkest moments. The next visitor to Emma's room would change their understanding of family forever. The door opened to reveal Sarah Johnson, Richard's widow, carrying a worn Christmas stocking with Tom's name embroidered on it. Her eyes were red from crying, but her smile was warm as sunshine on snow. "Ooh, Richard, it made me promise to bring this," she said softly. "He said Christmas magic works best when family is together." Inside the stocking was a legal document, in our own stone circle and adoption papers, signed by Richard before his death, not just for Tom, but for Emma too. His last act had been to ensure both his medical and family legacies would continue. "No," Sarah explained, tears flowing freely. "He knew Tom's blood would save Emma, and he wanted to make sure she would always have the protection of our family name, just like we protected Tom all those years ago." Karen stood shakily from her wheelchair, overwhelmed by this final gift. "But why? After how I treated Tom, after everything?" "Because that's what family does," Sarah replied, embracing her. "We heal each other's wounds, visible and invisible." Emma watched from her bed, her heart growing stronger with each beat as her world expanded to include this new family born from sacrifice and forgiveness. The morning sun streamed through the window, casting a golden glow over the scene, as if heaven itself was smiling. Tom hung the Christmas stocking beside Emma's bed, his hand lingering on the name his adoptive father had stitched so many years ago, Humiliates en Fontaine. Tom hung the choices we make to love each other, despite our fears and prejudices. The hospital room, once a place of crisis and uncertainty, had transformed into a sanctuary of healing and hope. The Christmas tree lights twinkled softly, reflecting in the tears of joy that flowed freely. Outside, the snow had stopped falling, leaving the world clean and new. The sun broke through the clouds, creating rainbow prisms in the frost-covered windows, nature's own celebration of this Christmas miracle. 1 year later, the Johnson White Medical Foundation opened its doors, dedicated to treating children with rare cardiac conditions. In the lobby, a photograph hangs proudly, Tom and Karen standing together, Emma between them, healthy and smiling, while Sarah looks on with pride. Beside it, Richard and David's medical journals are displayed, their shared wisdom continuing to save lives. And every Christmas Eve, they gather in Emma's room, not in the hospital now, but in her home, to hang 2 special ornaments on the tree, a stethoscope and a snow globe containing a tiny airplane. They serve as reminders that sometimes the greatest journeys aren't measured in miles, but in the distance hearts can travel from fear to love, from prejudice to understanding, from broken to healed. For in the end, the true miracle wasn't just the medicine that saved Emma's life, but the love that saved all their souls. proving that even in our darkest moments, light can shine through if we only have the courage to let it in. The end. Dear viewers, if this story of redemption, forgiveness, and healing has touched your heart, please take a moment to support our team by subscribing to our channel. Your subscription helps us continue creating meaningful content that challenges perspectives and brings hearts together. Don't forget to share this video with your loved ones. Perhaps they too need this message of hope and understanding. Hit that like button to spread the love, and please share your thoughts and emotions in the comments below. How did this story impact you? What moments moved you the most? Your engagement creates a community of understanding and compassion. Together, we can spread stories that matter. Thank you for being part of our journey.